Welcome to Mirrors into Windows, a podcast by Global Teaching Partners, an official Bridge USA designated organization. I'm Amy Corwin.
And I'm Dante Johnson. Together we dive into education from every angle, transforming reflections into opportunities and uncovering strategies that will help us look beyond the classroom walls.
Our goal is to connect educators from around the world, bringing you conversations, insights, and stories that will shift perspectives and ignite meaningful change. Because when mirrors become windows, the possibilities are endless.
Whether you're navigating life as an international teacher or searching for new ways to enhance your practice, this podcast is your go-to resource for inspiration, collaboration, and a richer understanding of the global classroom. Hey everybody, welcome back for another episode of Mirrors into Windows. And today I love this topic, empowering student voice and agency. I love that. What this means, let's just build this up really quickly for you just in case you're not quite sure of what this looks like. We're looking at providing opportunities, right? And supporting our students as your students are expressing their thoughts, their opinions, and choices. And that can be scary for some people.
Oh, yeah.
Like when you think about a teacher and you think about all the students in their classroom and all of them have their own opinions and all of them have their own thoughts. And yet being a teacher, part of your task or part of your work that you do is providing opportunity for them to think through their thoughts and kind of build their opinions and listen to their thoughts. And really what this does, it really helps to keep your students engaged. You know, like they want to be a part of something where they feel seen and they feel heard. So I see this as a way of, hey, I'm going to open up space and opportunity for students to thrive in this space. And because what you feel matters. And I feel like that's like one of the number one things in building relationship with your students. And so, yes, it is scary. I've been there. Amy, I'm sure you've been there.
Absolutely.
You talked about this not too long ago with a previous episode with Star, right?
Yeah. So you're basically saying that kids will take some ownership over their learning rather than you spoon feeding them everything. And when Star was with us, she talked a lot about her global led school, and that kind of lends itself very much to this. And that was hard for me because I am very A-type. You're going to want to just plan it out, give them the sheet, give them the activity, tell them what to do, get it done, do the assigning, and move on. And so this kind of turns that on its head, right?
Totally.
You kind of give some choice, you kind of give some advocacy, you give them some input into the direction that the lesson is going. Yeah. And so as the teacher, you might not know where it's going to end up. But over time, I learned that the product blew my mind what I could get out of these kids. Because you're requiring them to think at a far higher level than you would if you just kind of box them in and show them or tell them what they have to do. So we're going to look at some ways today that we can kind of, try this out in our classrooms. Yeah.
And just understand too, like naturally as teachers, we want to be in control.
Of course.
So let's just put that out there. We understand that. And those of you who struggle with this or you cringe or some of these strategies and things that we offer, we understand. We feel the same way. Like when we talk about it, we're probably going to be cringing a little bit at some of these examples. However, it's important to understand that we're relinquishing, we're letting go of that control. And like you said, Amy, the outcome, but it's not just about the outcome, it's about the process too.
The journey.
So
to get to the destination.
So I think like just coming with that mindset as we go through these strategies would be helpful today.
So we've put together 5 different ways or strategies that you can kind of empower your student voice. And so this first one, I know we've kind of mentioned in other episodes as a good tool kit for teachers to have. And that's the idea of introducing like a choice board or some center work in your class.
I love it.
A choice board, if for those that don't know, it's kind of like a menu of different activities that all meet the same learning objective, but it allows the students to kind of choose how they engage with the content and when they do. And so often if teachers set up good center work, it's kind of over the course of like a week. And the kids can either rotate through different activities or, they have that choice board, like it looks kind of like tic-tac-toe and they have to make sure they've completed 4 activities off the board or the whole board, whatever the teacher sets up as the way that, it can look like, say a 3rd grade science teacher is working on the life cycle. You could use a choice board where students can kind of create a label diagram, could be one activity, or they could write a short story from the perspective of like a seed or the plant. They could use some of the technology, their Chromebooks, to kind of record a video. Just different ways that all meet that same learning objective. Now, full disclosure, choice boards and center work takes a bit of time and effort and energy to get set up. Because I'm sure there's plenty of you thinking there, 25 kids doing whatever they want, whenever they want.
Scary.
Chaos is what it kind of ends up looking like. And so I know it's a daunting thing, but if you go into it with the mindset where you kind of set it up just like you've set up the rest of the expectations in your room, like, how do I get this started? What does transitioning look like? How do we finish up?
That's the key.
Where is the resources and the materials for like all of the different moving parts? Put a bit of thought into that at the start. Sets you up for some success to kind of do this.
You know what? My nerves though, Amy. Like, I'm going to be honest with you. It has been like, when I was first started teaching and we had those like the choice boards or the different centers, I could deal with it. Like, I loved it. The students were doing different things, and like you said, the key was setting up the expectations for it. The procedures were clear, but let me tell you, in my older age, I just can't. It's just so much.
Because it's really hard to manage multiple activities at once, like, and the noise level then rises.
And then you have this going on over here, and this happening over here, and this happening behind me. I'm just like...
But you got to get timers in place.
That's true.
Clear instructions in place. You're going to want to put station leaders in place to be able to make it happen. But you know what kids do? They love it because they feel like they've chosen their own activity. And so if it's a game is on the choice board, they think they're playing a game. But you know what? They're learning your objective. Or if they love the technology and recording themselves, they're going to get really excited about that. And so I've seen it work really, really well. A couple little nuggets. I do know it's difficult for our international teachers to adapt to that way, because I know coming from countries where kind of lecture-based, center work can be a little alien and a little bit of an uphill battle. You do run the risk of the students picking just the easiest option every single time off the list. And so you will have to think through some of those challenges. But if you're brave enough, and give it a go, because it does really increase motivation, excitement, and the kids will for sure feel really in control of their own learning, and it kind of lowers your presence in all of it.
And some teachers from other countries are not really sure about centers, right? Sometimes they might think that centers are just students working all on the same task in a group.
Right, like I assign one activity and they just do it together in a group. That's not the same as center work.
It's important to clear that. As they are. But then there are some times where, kind of going into a second strategy, where you could have a group of students working on a project, right? So there's project-based learning or problem-based learning. And so they're kind of like the same thing, but the problem-based learning is when they're looking at a problem that's going on in the real world, and they're looking at ways and solutions and how they can work through that. It's important for them to understand, like, oh, we're working together on these things. And then you have project-based learning, which is where students are kind of working on a project, and it's a little bit more structured. And so students are working on a project. So for an example, we had one where students had to learn about the foods that various countries eat, and then how much money they spent in a year on groceries, right? So they were looking at pictures and posters. Students were moving around the room and getting that information. Then they took that information, they used the numbers, and we did graphs and different things like that. But we also had them to do a deeper research, pick one of the specific countries and do a deeper research, a deeper dive on that country. And then they did a presentation, and they were able to present that country to the class. And then we did at the very end, we did a all-inclusive kind of activity where we invited an organization that packaged foods to send to other places. And so we had we packaged a bunch of meals, and the students, they were very engaged. So it was that's the project-based learning that I feel like is important in classrooms. And another example like the example you gave, Amy, it does take planning.
I mean, this is really cool. I will admit, it's really cool that kids get the opportunity to collaborate, to research, to think critically. When I was in my elementary school with Star, that was her vision for 85% of the work that we did had to be set up in this way. Projects could often go on a week, 2 weeks. But if I'm being honest, I didn't love it. Because every day you go but so far.
No.
And there's resources, materials in your classroom. I remember one time, similarly, what you're talking about, we're doing this long, elaborate project on animals across the world and their properties. And, you know, at one point there's like massive reels of construction paper everywhere. Kids are on computers researching. And there's just no organization to it. And I feel that word out of control. And I don't like it when I don't have control.
Right.
And, you know, it requires a lot of patience, a lot of just, come on, you'll just keep going every day. I mean, and you know what? Those projects were magnificent at the end.
Okay. Yeah.
And when it is all said and done, the work, the thinking, the critical level of understanding they have is amazing. It's a hard road to get there.
It is. And you have to have checkpoints with your students, right?
Okay.
Kind of like what you were saying before. I mean, there are some things.
Why you need clear rubrics, right?
Exactly. Yes, the rubrics. Like there are some things where you really have to know your students. Like, so, you know, student A might need, you know, daily check-ins with you to see how they're progressing, where student B could survive and off of every 3 days. You know, you just got to know your students and know, because they will get off track, you know, regardless of the age. However, it does give them space to learn. And like sometimes I used to get nervous because I wanted all students to be happy. I wanted them to enjoy this road, this journey. And you have a group where there's a disagreement. And I automatically thought, oh my God, there's a disagreement. This has failed. I can't do this. But that's a part of the process for the student too. It's just as well as being
troubleshooting.
So being that social aspect is just as important as the academic aspect. So letting them be to solve that issue and step in when you need to, but see where it goes first was a learning curve for me. So I get where you're coming from. However, I love this. I love that they're thinking about the world and how they can change the world.
And that's so real. That is so real. And you know, it's okay if not every single project is a winner. And you're trying some of these, you're just not sure how they're all going to go and how it's all going to end up. But it's worth having a go and seeing where the learning leads and what it does.
Right.
Another strategy that I think, or activity or way to sort of set your classroom up for really empowering these students, is this idea of student-led conferencing. Student portfolios and student assessments. What do I mean by all of that? Well, it's exactly what it says in the title. Instead of it being driven by you, it's driven by the student. So let's take the conferencing, for example. If you build a culture where it's appropriate for the student to come with the parent and facilitate and help with that conference, and you start to get them to take ownership of their learning by being able to present their own progress to their parents, their own goals, their own areas for improvement. Now, what goes hand in hand with that is this idea of the student-led portfolio, because of course every good teacher is going to want to have some data to be able to bring that to the table to look through. And so student-led portfolios is more this idea of building a portfolio of some of these projects, the center work, the data, assessments over time of the student that then they can kind of talk through. So you can be physical, it can be digital, but they kind of help a student track their learning journey, ultimately preparing them for the conferences.
I actually like that idea. Like, I will say that I do see some things that probably can go a little awry. It could be awkward in some instances, especially with
like when your parent gets really upset at the student in front of you because you're not saying so great or positive things. I've had that happen. That was uncomfortable.
So I think what I would like to do is to conference with the student alone first.
Okay.
to kind of practice how this would look and how this would go, because
they're prepared for what it's going to look like. They're prepared,
and the thing is, I'm on the student side, right? So I want to make sure that there are no surprises that I'm throwing at you in front of your mom or your dad or guardian.
That's a really good idea.
You know, so like talk to the students, say, we are going to talk about this. You know, you had some trouble with this. We're going to talk about this. I want to praise you in front of your mom talking about this. You know, like I want to give them an insight of what we're going to discuss. And then when we're there, and they probably tell their parent before they come to the conference.
Well,
anyway.
And I think that's going to really help with those kids that aren't that confident at speaking out. That way you can kind of have provided some structured questions, some maybe sentence starters to help them articulate their thoughts.
Yeah.
There's nothing more uncomfortable than trying to prompt a child to speak in front of their parent.
Yeah.
My daughter's like this. She has got such a great personality, but we take her out in public and she shuts down and I can't even get her to tell anybody her name. And I'm like, you're not a mute. Like, speak up. But oftentimes children cope that way by like kind of shutting down in front of a crowd, and then the whole thing wouldn't work out.
Right.
I also think, as much as you're saying you prep and prepare the student, I think it would be really advantageous if you're going to try this out to kind of send home an explainer to the parent as well, that this is the way the conference is going to go.
Right.
Maybe explain why student-led conferences matter. Maybe offer them some questions to guide and facilitate so that it doesn't turn into a negative. Because a lot of times parents just want to hear their kids doing well. And sometimes when you have to have some of those more difficult conversations, like about growth points or things that they need to do to improve, a parent just sees that as a personal attack. And I joked about that, where they just get into the kid right in front of you.
Right.
But they've missed the point of why you're doing it. And also that's why it's really important to have that portfolio of work, because then the focus can be like, here's what we've done, here's what we're working on, have a look at this work, facilitate this, and that can really help with that. The only one I didn't really highlight was the student assessments, but that means kind of the same thing as kind of where students work towards it. And I know one of the next strategies we're going to talk about is kind of capstone projects. And that can be a great way to kind of do a student assessment rather than just a printed test or something that you've generated to kind of go over their learning.
Is that like a survey or something for the student? What is this student assessment?
Where the student still has some input in kind of the assessment of their own learning.
Okay, yeah, I got you. Kind of like with the episode we talked about one time before with the different learning styles.
And the different learning styles. So it's them going a step further and using maybe the rubric or the tool that you've provided to assess their own work and to know, well, how am I doing in all of this? And how am I progressing and moving forward?
That's a new one for me. I like that. I'm gonna have to do more research on that. I think I like the point when you were talking about your daughter, how she shuts down, and that is so important. Like, I've seen that a lot with different students I've taught in the past, and I'm glad you highlighted that, because that's how some students cope. And they're not being disrespectful. It really is a way in which they're just kind of like working through being uncomfortable in that moment. One thing that I used to push my students to do is public speaking. And oh my goodness. Did
you see me raise my shoulders right there? That's not for everybody, public speaking.
It's not. But I felt like it was just important just for them to know how to communicate, you know, effectively. And one thing that I used to do is let them have debates. So I found this website that had pros and cons for various issues in the world. And I wanted it to be centered around school and education. And so like one would be like school uniforms, and have the students to have a debate on whether the pros of having school uniforms and the cons of having school uniforms. And one thing that I wanted them to do is, first of all, learn how to communicate effectively. But also I put some students on one of the sides that they necessarily didn't agree with naturally. And they were like, Mr. Johnson, like, this is so difficult. Like, what? Like,
how can I argue for something I don't believe in?
And so, but I was like, but this will allow you to see something in a different perspective. And what it did, it allowed them to grow even in a social aspect, so they can, when someone else disagreed with them, they were able to have that empathy and say, you know what? Okay, I don't agree in this moment. However, I see your perspective. I see why you responded the way you did, and that allowed them to kind of naturally work through things.
But what do you do with those kids that just dominate the discussion? I mean, you've got 25 kids. I'm sure you've got 10 of them that will absolutely love this style.
Yes.
And then you've got those little shy ones who are like, nope, don't ask me to share.
Yeah.
How do you work around that?
You said it before, like you put different things in place. So when you mentioned about the timer, right? So you're putting different things, like you can use a timer. There are various type of strategies or ways in which you can operate or facilitate classroom discussions. You have to put those in place, because like you said, you will have some students that would dominate over others and you would never hear some of what the others have to say. And it's not that they're shy, but it's just that they're not given that opportunity. So you need to have some structure.
Okay.
So you present that, and it does take practice. It was not a first thing. You got to think through it, and we have to practice the structure, put the structure in place before we even can have a successful debate or even be able to have a time where we can facilitate public speaking, right? So there are different things that you can do, but the students, at the end, they loved it, because they felt more comfortable. They felt like, oh, okay, I can trust my own thoughts, regardless of what other people feel or think about them.
I mean, if it's set up correctly, I know your students love to argue.
Yeah.
Kids love to argue with each other.
Yes.
But if it's in a controlled environment, oh boy, it can just make their learn and fly, because they have to be able to not just argue, but give substance to their argue.
Exactly.
Gotta give, like, you can't just spout off your opinion without giving valid reason and behind that. And those are critical skills for college, for careers. Like, if you're going to be part of the real world, you're going to have to learn to articulate your point well.
Absolutely.
Because people don't love an adult who's just got an opinion with zero grounding.
Right.
Those people don't get very far in life. But if you can articulate yourself well. And so I think that's a really awesome strategy to try out too.
Yeah, and I just feel like those type of things are what allows students to be successful later on, like in life, like you said, after high school. I do question sometimes, and I just think about, the younger age students and how some of these can look. And so naturally, I would say that this would be for your upper elementary, middle, high school.
This might be a little harder in the lower grades.
Yeah.
It could end up a little chaotic.
Yeah. I think speaking, though, would be great for,
I think you should give them opportunities to stand up and present in their small group. That's where leadership roles and things come into play very well.
Yes.
Back to the center work.
Yes.
Even as young as kindergarten, giving once in a while an opportunity for there to be a speaker to present their group, to present what they've been doing. Starts those skills early so that as they get closer to the upper elementary and into those middle grades, they are used to that. So it's not an unfamiliar thing to them.
I like that. So our last point, which would be like the capstone project. And yes, this is kind of similar to the problem-based learning I talked about. However, it was a little bit more involved, and I'll just give a snippet of what I've experienced with this. I don't have an extensive amount of experience with this, but in Baltimore City, there was, it's becoming a food desert. So there were families in the city who have to travel outside of the city limits into the county to go to grocery shopping, to get affordable groceries. Most of the stores inside the city are groceries are just too high. They're mostly locally owned stores. So a group of students, 2 8th graders, actually, 2 young ladies, they came and they wanted to kind of work on an activity where they could provide food, more so produce, for people who live in the city.
That sounds very student-led.
I was just kind of like, okay, I was really hands-off with this, really nervous, but hands-off.
Yep.
And I think that what happened was they were able to say, I see my parents struggling with this, so how can I step in? Because those students didn't always have their own transportation. They used public transportation. Paying all those groceries on the bus, is not the easiest thing
to do.
So they wanted to take ownership of that, and so they wanted to talk to certain people, in the city to see what they could do. They also they went around the city and saw food trucks. So they were like, well, how can we, instead of having just cooked food, how can we have a food truck that has produce and bring that into the city in certain areas of the city? And I thought that was phenomenal. And so the big part of that is they did do some research with that, but the big part of that was kind of like taking the research and the project, and also we talked about with public speaking, they had to communicate and partner with someone who had a food truck to make this happen. So it wasn't them just doing it themselves, but they had to seek out resources and communicate with them. And they were able to bring the food truck not too far from the school, so we're able to see it. But they were selling produce, and people were able to come and get the food.
Now that sounds really great. Oh my gosh, I can't believe kids would even be that intuitive to kind of think of a need like that and want to try to fill it. But I have to admit, I've been always very nervous about capstone projects because I don't know an awful lot about them, but you can, as you just explained, it kind of was an idea born from a real experience at home, but really out of nowhere. It doesn't necessarily tie into one specific thing that you were doing in that moment in your class.
Right.
And so often I would be a little afraid, like students wouldn't know where to start, or the project, because it's more of a long-term sustainable thing, it might get abandoned halfway and it kind of goes to nowhere. And so some teachers might be nervous about the getting it off the ground part because there's no vision of where it's going to end or what's going to happen with it.
That's true.
I think to combat that, though, we've talked about this a lot over the episode, is structure, guiding questions, brainstorming sessions, checkpoints, checking in, present some feedback. Where is this? Where's it going? What do we need to do next? Rather than just let it be an open-ended thing with no determined timeline. Might help it have some structure around it to kind of keep it within the realms of kind of the learning and the moving forward of your day-to-day classroom.
And I see your point with that. I can understand how someone could be hesitant. And just to know, like, this is not necessarily for all students either.
Okay.
Like, I feel
so
like...
you wouldn't do this with your whole class?
So, variations of it you could. But the example I gave was
really
like,
just those two kids, or
it was just those two students.
So when did they do this? During your class time or after?
Good question. So they did it like some during their class time. They did a lot of it after because it took a lot of planning, a lot of them time to talk and communicate with people, make the connections and the network that they needed to do. And so a lot of that was done behind the scenes. And so it really did help that they naturally had the drive to do
they
this.
just bring that information back to you and you facilitate that?
They bring the information back to me. Honestly, I'm going to say this is an outlier because this example was like, it was something that they sparked it. And I said, okay, well, you got to find the resources to do different things to gather that information. But it really did come out successful, but it's not for everybody.
Okay.
Because it's a lot. But there are variations of other things, like when we talked about the project-based learning. There are projects that can be worked on in the classroom with students, but you might have some students that would like to reach outside of the classroom walls and work that. So
look, you can tell by all my questions, I'm very curious about this.
No, but it's
so
good, though.
I'm going to have to go and do a little more research. Maybe it's something we could try in the future. We've talked about a lot of great stuff today. I hope we have encouraged you to try something new in your class that might allow you to create that idea of some student agency, student voice, empower your students more in your class. One thing I want to be sure to tell you, it doesn't mean that you're going to have to give up control of your classroom and just flip the script on leading the charge. You are still the leader of your classroom. But it does mean focus shifting slightly so that students can kind of, take some ownership of their learning and get to be involved a bit more in your learning. And so we really do hope that you've enjoyed some of these strategies we've outlined today. And, well, what's one way that you can give your students more voice this week? Today I have the opportunity to be in Miss Kenesha Samuel's classroom. She is a Jamaican teacher, a middle school teacher. And so is there a moment in your career, Kenesha, that stands out as a defining experience for you?
One of the most defining moments in my career was working with an ESL student who was strong in math but lacked confidence in speaking up. He often had the right answers, but hesitated to share them, worried about making mistakes in English. To help him build confidence, of course, I reinforced vocabulary and I used academic language as part of my lesson, and I encouraged him to lead his table group in discussions. Over time, he became more comfortable explaining his thinking to his peers. The turning point came when I asked him to teach the class how to write and solve two-step equations with fractional coefficients. I still also have a video of this experience. He walked through each step clearly. He used precise math vocabulary and answered questions from his classmates with confidence. His growth didn't stop there. What started as small moments of encouragement led to a complete transformation. He went from being a bubble math student to excelling in math. By the following academic year, he was placed in Math 1, proving to himself and others that he was more than capable. Seeing this kind of progress firsthand is exactly why I teach, to help students realize their own potential and give them the tools to succeed.
Thanks for listening to Mirrors into Windows. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, rate, and review our podcast. It helps us reach more educators just like you.
And don't forget to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, or any other social media, or visit our website at globalteachingpartners.com. Until next time, I'm Dante Johnson.
And I'm Amy Corwin.